So I wanted to do a channel on something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is the New Deal, which was a series of programs, public works, financial reforms, regulations enacted by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the United States between 1933 and 1939. It had three main categories of reforms. It had three main categories of programs and reforms, and those are called relief, recovery, and reform. I specifically wanted to talk about how the New Deal relates to some of the problems that we're having today and might provide some solutions to the financial crisis that we're currently in. Currently, I am here in the great Seattle quarantine of 2020, the coronavirus quarantine. It is day 32 of my quarantine, which means I haven't been out in public for about 32 days. And the coronavirus and the response to it, specifically the quarantine, has shut down business in the United States for the last several weeks, which has, of course, caused a financial crisis. But the problem is that the financial crisis would have happened to us at some point, whether we liked it or not. Now, of course, the quarantine was sort of the black swan event that a lot of people say created the crisis, but we had record consumer debt, housing debt, auto debt, corporate debt, government debt, and global debt. And that indicates to me that we would have had a financial crisis anyway. What I believe our current situation in the United States, we're probably at the start of the next Great Depression. And I personally don't see any way that we are going to get around having a depression, something that we haven't seen in the United States for almost 100 years. The reason I would make I'm making this channel is because what I genuinely hope will happen sooner rather than later is that we're going to look at some of the New Deal policies that got us out of the last depression and for solutions to our current situation. I don't see that happening much currently. We're trying to basically reinflate the bubble, where a lot of the bailouts, the quantitative easing, a lot of the things the government has done to try to alleviate the financial crisis. There's been a lot of money that's been given to companies that irresponsibly bought back their own stock in the last few years. And when they buy back their own stock, it inflates the stock price, which in turn is great for executives, but it leaves the company without much savings. And that's what's currently happened. Which, by the way, would also like to mention that stock buybacks were illegal up until the early 80s. So people have no savings to fall back on. They're maxed out on their credit cards with extraordinarily high interest rates, even before the coronavirus. So now the coronavirus has happened. We've had the shock to the system. And what you're starting to see are some very, very sad scenes. You're seeing long lines of people waiting for food in Miami, Pittsburgh, Los Angeles, San Antonio. But I'm going to tell you, we've been here before, and we found a way out. And what I am proposing is that we look back at some of those New Deal programs, and especially policies around the financial system, for ways that we can use those to get ourselves out of our current problems. I honestly think that New Deal style reforms are going to happen whether I or anybody else talks about it or not. I would personally want to see those reforms happen sooner rather than later. In the Great Depression, between 29 and 33, the market dropped. The market dropped significantly, and the height of unemployment was in 1933. We started the New Deal in 33. By 34, industrial output in the United States had risen 45%. That was in 1 year. And the New Deal was rocky. The road to recovery was not a direct road. It had a lot of ups and downs. But we can learn a lot from FDR and what he left us. One other thing I'd like to talk about this channel is labels. And in almost all these political or economic channels, you hear about a lot about socialism and capitalism, and free markets, and libertarianism and communism. My own personal belief is that, especially with the dichotomy between socialism and capitalism, is that entire those arguments are not very useful, since most economies are mixes of of all of these policies, and that's what you're going to want in a good economy. You want to figure out the ways where socialism worked, as it does well in Sweden, and where it failed, as it did in um, the former Soviet Union or Venezuela or Cuba. So there's socialist policies that I would promote, and there's socialist policies that I think have proven themselves to be bad ideas. The same thing with free markets. There's some places where I think free markets do a great job, and I'll explain why I think they work in certain areas and don't work in others. Um, but I feel like once you start talking about this stuff, people start to try to find out which team you on. Are you team socialism? Are you team Democrat? Are you team um, Republican? Are you team free markets or capitalism? I want to try to avoid those labels, because I think that those labels are oftentimes distracting and create bad policy. When you're too married to these giant overall ideas, individual policies need to be examined to figure out what the nuts and bolts of that policy should actually be. So that's one reason that I'm going to talk about this. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this channel. I'm going to go through in the next week or so, I'm going to go through relief, recovery, and reform, and talk about the types of programs that Roosevelt had, like the Civilian Conservation Corps under recovery, the Social Security Administration when it was created, financial reforms like the Glass-Steagall Act, which was one of the most important pieces of financial legislation that we have has ever been created in the United States. And I would also like to talk about a little bit about regulation and the types of regulations that were put into place, especially the connection between government and business during the Depression. That I really think, you got to delve down into the details of this, but I really think were one of the major factors that got us out of the first Great Depression.